Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only podcast that takes place right here between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake.
And I'm Brendan.
And today we are talking about the decisions in Praga Caput Regni. But before we jump into that, let's just welcome new listeners. If you found us from our last episode, which did really well, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. And we're glad you stuck around to check out this episode.
Yeah, definitely. It's quickly becoming, I think, our most listened to episode of all time. So Jake and I are really excited about the conversation that's been developing around that new theme that new lens around theme and a different way to sort of look at theme and critically reflect. And the conversation that's been happening in our Discord and on Board Game Geek around that is, I think, really interesting and really productive. Some of the little ways that it's been added upon is awesome.
Yeah. And the other thing I want to just take one short moment to do before jumping into our main topic is to read another review that we got on Apple Podcasts. These, we're learning, go so far towards helping our show get discovered by new people, growing this community, growing our audience, which is fantastic. So thank you for leaving reviews. We're going to continue to read them out as we get them. And this review is titled Going Next Level, and it's a 5-star review. And it goes on to say, great board game podcast that goes to another level as they discuss what makes specific games so interesting. Great listen. And this was by MJ Bensky 12, who may be Miles Bensky in real life, I'm deducing, an artist who's done some board game art for Stonemaier and other games. So Miles, thank you so much for listening to our podcast and for leaving that really kind review.
Yeah, thank you, Miles. And I really appreciate that you think we're taking it to the next level. And I'm excited for all the leveling up we're going to continue to do. But, Jake, should we get into our synopses of Praga?
Let's do it. So, as we always do on these episodes focusing on just one game, we like to start out with our ratings and a little slogan for the game at the top. So, Brendan, I'm going to leave it to you, as I want to do when I get to be the host, and make you go first.
Okay. Praga has a tremendously broad decision space with many available actions, sub-actions, and branching sub-actions of those actions on a given turn. It's a puzzle Euro through and through, and while I came to Praga excited to see what Vladimir Suchi's immediate follow-up to the triumph that is Underwater Cities is, I was left disappointed that nothing positioned as novel added up to more than the sum of its parts as a game that with so many interlocking systems sort of ought to. Praga Caput Regni, which I've totally mispronounced the Latin pronunciation, translates literally as Prague, the head of the kingdom in Latin, but I've entirely missed the crown. 5 out of 10.
Ooh, it's a low rating for us. So I'll jump in next. Praga is a game by a absolutely genius designer, and you can really see Suchi's, handiwork in this design. It's an immensely complicated game, and yet it feels very fluid and seamless to me to play. I think the game flows really well, which is a triumph for how much different things are going on. I really have enjoyed learning and discovering the game. And now that I'm 11 plays in, I don't feel like there's that much more to return to. So I'm really stuck straddling a line here because it's a game I've really enjoyed my plays of, and also a game I'm not really interested in continuing to play at this point. So I am going to kind of come down somewhere in the middle and give it a 6.5.
I cannot wait in this episode to get out the scalpel and figure out why both of us don't want to go back to this game, despite us both, I think, really loving the designer. And I agree, Jake. It's a really streamlined Euro game that I hope my 5 is not to say that I think it's a bad game. I certainly think Praga is a totally fine game and a really interesting one, but it's just not one I have a lot of fun playing.
Yeah. And I think we'll get into our issues and challenges with the game, as well as what we really enjoyed about it in our exploration of the decision space. But we should give a little bit of background. As mentioned, this is a Vladimir Suchi joint famous designer for games like Last Will, Pulsar, 2849, and of course, one of our collective favorites on this podcast, Underwater Cities. It came out just this past year in 2020, and it plays 2 to 4 players. The tagline is, "Wealthy citizens of medieval Prague organize building projects to gain the king's favor."
Well, at least there's the Prague aspect of this very beige theme.
So we will jump right into Brendan's amazing rules overview to give you a little bit of a better idea of how to play this very complicated game. Brendan, thanks for doing this. You've got your work cut out for you. And before we jump into that, let's also let our pre-planners know. Those are the people who like to pre-plan their turn in games and pre-plan their journey through this podcast with us. By playing games along with us, that over the next 2 episodes of games, we'll be covering first Spirit Island, then it will be another What We Talk About episode like we did last week on a different topic, and then following that, it will be Race for the Galaxy. So some really epic games coming up.
Praga Caput Regni is a resource management Eurogame with a novel action selection wheel mechanism. Players take on the role of wealthy citizens of Prague, vying for the king's favor as they build different areas in Prague. Each game of Praga takes place over the course of exactly 16 rounds. In each round, the players will begin their turn by selecting an action from the action wheel. Each action consists of a pairing between one of 6 action tiles, each containing 2 choices on an outer wheel, and a bonus inner wheel action. Given the arrangement of the wheel, the pairing between these actions and their bonuses is dynamic and shifting. After selecting an action, which includes increasing production of gold or stone, gaining gold or stone, developing a new technology, which provides players with bonuses for future actions of a matching type, building a building in Prague, which gives an immediate effect and allows them to participate in a light area control on the board amongst buildings built by other players in different regions of Prague for a bonus, build a wall tile for a small immediate bonus with a spatial hex puzzle on their own player board, or advance down the King's Road to gain immediate bonuses and work towards powerful endgame scoring conditions. Over the course of the game, the players who also manage window resources, which come in 2 types, silver and gold, are used to gain additional points immediately or game end points for moving up the Cathedral or Hunger Wall, 2 discrete grid point tracks, or by spending gold windows to take an extra action. There's a lot of moving pieces in Praga, and much of the puzzle is about timing the right action alongside the right bonus at the appropriate time in the game while juggling the potential benefits and timing trade-offs of a slew of other systems like technologies, constant or single-use bonuses, seals, unique endgame scoring conditions, or advancing up the Charles University track to improve the scoring potential of your technology track at the end of the game. Praga has a breadth of decisions, so I hope this was at least a good start in helping you understand the resource management point salad Eurogame that Praga is.
All right. Thank you, Brendan, for that rules overview. You did your best.
I was chuckling before because this is a game, Jake, that takes like 40 minutes to learn, 30 minutes if everyone's hustling and knows Eurogames pretty well and has a lot of experience. So the idea that I could sum it up in 2 minutes is like kind of mind-boggling. But like you said, hopefully that just gives everyone at least a sense for what Praga as a game is like. And we'll do our best to continue to contextualize sort of different systems and mechanisms as best we can. But there's no way we can get into everything because there are a lot of little exceptions and little interesting offshoots of different mechanisms even in the game.
Definitely. So let's jump right into our decision space evaluation of a game. We'll put it through the ringer, and let's start out by talking about the size of the decision space itself. So I know you mentioned in your slogan that you felt like there was really a breadth of decisions. Do you want to kind of take the first stab at characterizing this?
Sure, absolutely. I think that one of the strengths of Praga and what it's trying to do as a design is give the players a ton of choices. On any given turn, that sort of novel action selection wheel basically enables players, if they have resources, right? If they're willing to spend a gold or two, they have access to almost any action in the game. Maybe not the special version of some of those using the special inner wheel bonus mechanism that is there. But for the most part, if they have the resources, you could pay to do anything in the game. So you have a lot of choices on a given turn. And then once you select a given location, you also have a choice of two different actions. So if you really cared about a specific bonus, you still, on the inner wheel, you need that specific bonus. You're still given a choice associated with that bonus. And then once you pick a bonus, you are given generally a choice of a few different things that you can do, whether it's you're upgrading, you're improving your actions. You're going to have a choice of 3 tiles, maybe 4 if the special is there. The same goes for walls, or building buildings within the city of Prague itself. If you're building walls, you're going to have a bunch more choices of where that wall goes. If you're building buildings, you're going to have a bunch of more choices of where that building should go in Prague. Oh, do you want it to be in the upper part of Prague where you can pay even more points, even more gold and get some more points for it? Or do you want it to be in the lower portion of Prague where you just select any number of these 10 different spots that it could go into? And there's obviously a bunch of information that feeds into all of this. Do you want to manage your mines or quarries? Okay, great. Well, do you want to get one of the associated gold or stone and increase your production in future turns? Or do you just want resources equal to your production? Oh, great. You did the managed portion. That's going to bump you up and it gives you this other thing. So there's lots of this sort of, I think the breadth of decisions and trying to filter through available information is quite large. And if there's a game at the heart of Praga, that's the game, is trying to figure out what your optimal path is. Player interaction is quite light. There is a certain degree of like, I'm going to take this action and make it slightly more expensive for someone else maybe, but it's really not hugely consequential. And I just think there's so many choices, Jake, that the noise begins to become, the impact of any given decision feels fairly low. And that's why I think there's a breadth of decisions or choices rather than necessarily a depth of them that you might have in some other designs with relatively light systems, but deep, organic, emergent gameplay that comes out of those systems.
At its best, I think Praga does have this really fun dynamic where you have these 6 main actions in the game that you described, and each of those has their own tree of decisions that you can then pursue. So I think at its best, it has this really fun element where you can think through all those different paths and try and come up with like this optimal play that can be a sequence of 4 or 5 steps on a single turn. When you add in kind of the sub actions that go with these various things, like, okay, I've produced stone and that allowed me to up my research track, which allowed me to get this bonus action, which is going to allow me to do, X, Y, Z. And I think that's really fun. However, I actually think the feel of the decision space for me when I'm playing this game is kind of small because of the way, as you mentioned, there's so much noise in the game where you have all these different options that you could do, and they all seem pretty good. So I think the way my brain processes this game very often would be to like look at all of that overwhelming amount of choice and information and then just choose, as a shortcut, one of the actions at the, farthest end of this action wheel, which we'll probably have to talk about in more depth. But essentially that like prioritizes specific actions, right? By making them either free or even giving you bonus points. And I just found like, if you want to have that shortcut, you might as well just like focus on doing the best with like out of 1 or 2 possible options every turn. And maybe that's not optimal, but in my plays of the game, it really seemed effective. Like I've played this game 11 times now at all player counts, and I think I've won 9 games doing that.
Yeah,
so,
I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah, so that kind of just like the results reinforce that idea that wait, maybe the mass amount of apparent decisions is actually just a mass amount of choice, and the actual decisions you have on your turn is a lot smaller than it first appears.
That's definitely how it feels to me as well, Jake. And I think that's part of the frustration with the game is if I'm happy to interact with noise, if it's going to lead to a more interesting decision space, like that can be really exciting. But when it feels like noise for noise's sake, that becomes sort of extraneous and frustrating. What do you feel the type of decision space is in Praga, the 16 round game?
I think that it feels very static,
Yeah.
actually, which is interesting because, traditionally when we think about these static decision space games, a lot of times they're like, smaller, more abstract, or even simple
Hmm.
games. And I think this is like on the exact other end of the spectrum, right? Because there's so much noise and complication happening. Uh, every single turn, even though in some ways, like, yes, you're ramping up your production, so you'll be able to do more, you'll be able to potentially combo more things at later point in the game as you kind of advance on all these different tracks all over the place. Uh, because I found myself always looking at, only the actions available that are furthest along on this. What do we want to call it? Like an action rondo,
Action or sure, yeah,
action
or even
wheel?
just an action wheel. Yeah.
Yeah, whichever, because I'm only focusing on like the one or two actions furthest along the action wheel. Uh, you know, e- each turn was presented to me very similarly. That made it feel static, even if in reality it's maybe, very slightly waxing over the course of the game.
It's interesting. So I even with the what you're saying of just focusing on those two locations, even if we take a step back and like factor in inputs like I know early game you do care about increasing your production more, like upgrading some of your actions more than you might later in the game. So those decisions are on your mind. I think because the cost even of things that you weren't looking at, because in your heuristics ladder, it just wasn't important, generally they're so affordable that you do still have access to them, that I agree it does feel pretty static. And you do build over the course of the game somewhat, but it's really minor. You really only ever build your actions a little bit. And the effects of when you improve your actions is pretty minimal. Any other time you're like building a wall or building a building, it's sort of this one-time thing. And in a lot of games that are sort of these hero puzzles, you end up also having some sort of engine that you build on the side. And like, yes, you're increasing production, but I think it just makes it so you have to do the production actions less often. Like you're managing your mines just less frequently, and you're trying to time what the right amount is in the game because there's no like outlet except for maybe the seals at the end game scoring that give you a bunch of points that sort of enable more and more growth in terms of the feedback loop. It's just not there. It's about maximizing your potential points over a few of these actions and figuring out when the right time in the game is. Even something like the Hunger Wall or the Cathedral, they're really tracks, right? They're like two-dimensional tracks. They're just grids presented that way so that you have a little bit of texture again of like, is it the right time to move up or should I be moving to the right? But they're really just scoring tracks. You don't, it never feels like my actions are building upon another all that much. It's there a little bit, but not a ton. So I think surprisingly, the game does feel pretty static, if not, to your point, a little bit waxing as well.
Yeah, and I guess we should say waxing means the decision space grows over the course of the game. If you
Yeah.
haven't gone back and listened to the episode "A New Way to Talk About Decision Space" or something, is that what it was?
Yeah. I think it's just a new way to talk about games, which
A new way to
maybe
talk
was
about
a
games.
little bit too broad. But yeah, there are different types of decision spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, if you enjoyed our most recent episode, you'll probably find a lot to enjoy about that one. But as I said, it felt like a waxing decision space. And then you started talking. I also realized that actually at the later point in the game, because of the decisions you've made and kind of the end of
Hmm.
game scoring you've activated for yourself,
Sure.
you actually might have less option, like
It sort of
less
wanes in that sense.
decision because okay, well, I'm going to get all these bonus points by having a lot of gold at the end of the game. So on my last turn, I just have to, produce gold. Uh,
Yeah.
so I
That's
think maybe to put a finer point on that, at the beginning, it feels very, very small decision space because you can really prioritize certain things in the game. At the end, it feels very small because you have to prioritize your scoring opportunity. And only in the middle turns of the game is really when you have the opportunity to do any kind of strategy shaping at all to whatever small extent that exists in the game. So maybe kind of it does have a little bit of a curve in that sense.
Yeah, though certainly not as dramatic as something that we would normally call a dynamic game, and not oscillating as much as we might. Um, I think that to sort of explain where you were coming from, to one thing that a point we should make is that an interesting aspect of Praga is it is the type of Euro game where you're just going to get paid out for some of your resources at the end of the game, like you'll get paid out for your eggs and other things, but you also sort of opt into your game end scoring options, at least the ones that have the greatest potential for giving a lot of points, by getting to the end of certain tracks or up certain tracks, or pushing your token on the hunger wall or cathedral further along. So investing resources into certain scoring options, you kind of lock yourself out of the decision space and carve out an end game scoring for yourself. There's also these seals on the table, which represent pretty powerful end game scoring that you can block from one another. So there's one that will give you 2 points for every gold that you have at game end, or 3 points for every gold and ore or stone. Things like that, or some of them are just flat points. Here, you got to the party late, you can have 4 points, which that system's interesting. It sort of gives the decision space a little bit of flexibility, I think, and adds a little bit of an element of the race, which I do think you need some form of a little bit of a race element in Euro games like these sometimes, to give you a need to want to interact and look at what each other are doing.
Right. I the only reason I want to push back on that a little bit is because it seems like the action wheel
Sure.
limits your ability to like actually choose different things throughout the game, rather than doing like what's just like the best to you in terms of like resource accumulation. That, again, while you could race up a track, it almost always, in my experience, seems like not worth it if you're taking a less optimal move by like paying gold to take an action in
Sure.
order to like secure the end game scoring you want, as opposed to just taking the best actions, and like eventually you'll have the opportunity to claim an end game scoring, and by that point you might just have so much more resource and ability to apply that in different ways throughout the game, that it doesn't really matter what your end game scoring is.
I do think that so there's also a mechanism, these different ages, where new tiles that are more powerful of the wall tiles and the city tiles and the action improvement tiles come out. And I think those can serve to incentivize maybe paying sometimes if something really powerful comes out, that given the position that you're in is going to reward you greatly if you opt into that tile, that can make paying for things worthwhile. So when those shift over, when a new sort of age as it is starts, that can be a little bit exciting. And then also one novel aspect of the action wheel, which I do like, though I don't think lives up to some of the other sort of novel action mechanisms of Vladimir Suchi's other games, is when the action wheel gives you those pairings that happen that are special between the bonuses and the city tile types, in a way that it feels like the perfect thing that you need at the moment. And you get to take it and you get the bonus that you need and the action that you need, and it lets you do these sort of extra things just by having barely enough thanks to the bonus. For me, those were some of the most exciting moments in Praga. But a mechanism like that doesn't live up to the height of something like the worker placement card system of Underwater Cities, that to me feels simpler and more exciting. This might be a good point in the podcast, Jake, to just say that on decision space, we generally focus on the decision space of games purely. We keep that at the forefront. Praga is a game with beautiful production. There's these incredible 3D player boards, and the wheels are literal wheels that move. So those are aspects of this game that I think has really endeared a large subset of its player base too. And that's a really important aspect of playing games, just not one that on decision space we generally delve in too much.
Well, let's take that opportunity to apply our new framework about theme.
Sure.
How would you categorize the theme in this game in terms of environmental, mechanical, and decision theme? I think this is pretty Easy.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a great question, and it's pretty apropos of where the podcast itself and sort of our journey and applying our lenses is going. So I appreciate you asking it. I think it's a game that wants to be higher in the environmental scale, though doesn't for me quite get there. I think we in our examples in our posts and on our podcast last time, we sort of created this false binary to create more interesting conversations. But I think this would actually be like sort of a medium environmental. I think the mechanical theming of these different elements is quite low, actually. Like the walls don't do anything particularly wall-like. The buildings get a pass, I guess. I know. I don't know. I'm not building a building. I'm just selecting a bonus and putting it next to another bonus, and like there's nothing building like about these. And some of them, I guess, apply to the Hunger Wall or the Cathedral. It'd feel more thematic if they applied to one or the other, maybe if this was like a church, but it's a game that doesn't want to make mechanical compromises for its theming. Fine. And decisionally, I definitely don't feel like a wealthy citizen of Prague building out the city of Prague, which is like what drew me to the game is I was excited about that. Because I actually love the theme, this idea of this city building game where us around the table are going to, over the course of the game, build out the city of Prague. But like at game end, there's all these gaps in Prague with the locations of buildings. And I don't know why, like I'm building my own wall in my own player space and you're building yours. I think it's a mismatch between the overall subject of the game and sort of whatever theme it's trying to apply, this like collective building. It's just not there.
I think, yeah, the mechanical theming in this game is like almost a case study of like what low mechanical theming is like. And it feels like perhaps the fact that you have to like collect an egg to move up the bridge track, spend an egg to like move your guy along the bridge is almost like a knowing nod that, yeah, like this is like nonsense, but it's silly. And I think in the rule book, it says something like, there was a myth that like eggs were used in the concrete
mortar,
to like build the St. Charles, like whatever, right? You know, that is like the fact that you have to like spend a bread to move your pawn down the bridge is like, that is like the low mechanical theme poster
Completely.
child.
Yeah.
I think it fits squarely into like kind of the low category of these kind of like Euro games of old, the Castles of Burgundies of the world. And I just think like for environmental theme, the production is beautiful.
Yes.
But that's kind of like separate from environmental, right? Like I love the art. It looks like a great cityscape. I guess it's got the St. Charles Bridge that places us in Prague, but yeah, I mean, I don't know.
No,
I never once thought about Prague playing this game in my 11 plays.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point. And I don't know, to this point, I don't know what makes Prague all that different from other cities. Like this city could have been anything except for the eggs and the mortar, which but it really, and I think that that's not a knock against the game. It's not a lesser game for that. It's just that the theme and the thematic implementation isn't a selling point of this specific game, and that's fine.
Right. Okay. Unless, and many of our favorite games are low thematic integration games. And so not a value statement, but perhaps something to think about if you're interested in trying out this game. So let's move on to some of the more specific components of the game. Should we talk a little bit more about the wheel and the bonus action selection? I know we got into that a little bit in our conversation of the decision space itself.
I feel like we've mostly covered it. I will say that in Vladimir Suchy games, one more time, I do think that he tries to build his games around these novel action selection mechanics. And part of why this game misses for me is this mechanism. But do you have other thoughts on it
I guess
how it works?
I think that this mechanism is like so nearly the best thing ever. Like it's so nearly like just like a 10 out of 10. And it makes the first play of the game, I think, really accessible and fun because it does take what is a very complex and overwhelming amount of decisions and it streamlines it for the players and says like, yes, you have access to all these things, but you could always just pick between these two most advanced tiles, and do good that way. And I think that is like a really nice way of kind of spanning this difficult divide between players who want a really great first play experience and players who
Mm.
want a really deep experience that they can dive into. So the first time I played Praga, I thought like, this is amazing. I'm having such a fun time right now just exploring this game, just picking amongst these two things. And in the future, it'll be fun to, see what I can do with better knowledge of all the actions and kind of interchange at will. But I just found that, like, as I had mentioned, it seemed too powerful taking the actions that the game is incentivizing you to take to the point where maybe you only want to pay for an action, 0, 1, or maybe 2 times over the course of the game. In my experience, having played this, I think 11 times, perhaps people who've played it 50 times will say, you've got this wrong. But, uh, you know, I feel like I played it quite a bit, and that's a pretty clear takeaway for me through my learning thus far.
One thing we've talked about on the show a fair amount is how what we've observed from looking at Feld games, and I think Feld is one of our favorite designers on the show who does these sort of low thematic, low environmental, low mechanical, low decisional theming games well, and makes a case for them being really strong ways for games to exist, is the interlocking nature of systems. And I think that this wheel system is that. It's exactly that. And it's almost so interesting. And all of my quibbles with this game are not the wheel, which I agree are so cool, the decision space it creates and the multiple sublayers that it has. It's just all the things that the inputs from the outputs of the wheel plug into, right? Like, I want to play a game with this wheel mechanism again. I just am not super excited about the game post wheel,
Yeah,
and what I get to do with them.
if Suchi chooses to use this mechanism in another game, I will be very excited to try that game. I think it is a really cool innovation, kind of divorced from the implementation in this game. And I think even potentially an expansion to this game could really elevate it to something else. So I don't want to, like, just because I have challenges with the implementation, I still think that this mechanism has tons of potential to create super rich decision spaces. And I think it's like a really, really genius innovation from the designer.
We haven't really talked about this, and I think that it would be awesome if we could glean at this moment why we are so into this mechanism, despite it not working, as like this idea of a decision engine within a Euro game, right? This like mechanism or set of systems that interlocks to create dynamic and interesting decisions that make every play feel differently. That's almost what Praga does, despite the implementation not quite being there. And that is what Feld Games does.
Yeah, I was going to say Castles of Burgundy is like a great example of the decision engine where every turn you're presented by like your own awesome, fun puzzle to engage with.
Totally. And like Bruges, when the dice get rolled, that's another really fascinating little decision engine, as you have to reference and see how that impacts everything that you could do. And it creates this really dynamic space. And I think that Praga's decision engine is let down by its destination, not the engine itself.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Let's continue on to some of these other mechanisms in the game and the bearing they have on the decision space, if that's all right with you.
That sounds awesome.
Okay. Right. So we'll talk through the different actions, and let's just touch on them really briefly. There's 6 main actions in the game. The first is production, where you can manage your mines and quarries. This is how you can increase your production of gold or stone, or you can produce gold and stone at the level you're currently at. And any kind of takeaways about this? Pretty straightforward.
It's pretty straightforward. I do think one cool aspect is that the increasing your production always gives you one of the type of resource that you're increasing. And once you get to a certain point on the track, you can augment that further. So I think it is interesting how the proportion of benefit that you're getting from increasing is relative to the point in the game that you're at. And also, it basically makes it such that you're trying to figure out when the right time to actually produce and get this glut of resources is. And I think that for me was also one of the more interesting decisions in the game of, I did feel some degree of tension of, I know I should just be increasing my production because in the course of the game, it's going to be so beneficial to do that. Getting to the top of one of these tracks, I'm going to get seals. There's good bonuses on the tracks, whether it's getting an egg, those juicy, juicy eggs, or other things. And then obviously just producing gives you that influx of resources that can be really powerful in terms of getting a specific wall or city that you want. So I felt tension here. And to me, that's the coolest aspect of the system. There's so much, Jake, in this game, like so many little pieces that are there, I think, that do make the decisions more interesting too. So in terms of the bonuses you get for reaching certain thresholds of resources on hand are sort of interesting that incentivize in the other direction, right? So if I get to 6 gold, oh, great, I get a book, and that book's going to increase my technology track. And once I get to a certain part of my technology track, I get this thing. And it does have that interaction of elements. It just feels forced and not organic. And I think that's partially what we're pushing back on too.
Yeah, there are trade-offs here. And I think anytime you have interesting trade-offs, that's the shortcut to there are interesting decisions to be had. And I think that's the thing I like most about it, is that when you get to a certain threshold of stone or gold, that it rewards you for that, but you're also incentivized to, instead of producing, to just make sure you're increasing your production to get to the end, because that's how you unlock end of game scoring. So I think that's great. However, it also just feels like in practice, it's not that hard to make these decisions. Like you can have like a really simple heuristic of, I'm just always going to increase my production unless it's going to allow me to reach one of these barriers. And that just seemed to work like really flawlessly with the game, right? The game is just providing these incentives, and if you're just following those signposts, right, throughout this game, it's like you're gonna do really well. And the accumulation of all of those signposts and following them and all the heuristics it gives you just again leaves it feeling like, wait, maybe there aren't so many decisions here. It's more just kind of like reading and following the cues.
Great. Let's talk about the King's Road.
Okay.
What did the eggs? Get your eggs out, pull out the cartons. So the King's Road is really another endgame scoring outlet, but I would say, Jake, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's vital you get to the end of the King's Road by the end of the game. Almost vital.
I think you have to either get to the end of the King's Road or get to the very top of I don't remember if it's the Cathedral or the Hunger track, but those both give you access to the same end of game scoring tiles. And I think you have to do one. You have to do one, if not the other. And it just seemed in my plays that the path of least resistance to that was usually going down the road. And plus, going down the road gives you bonuses along the way that are often really useful. Nice.
Yeah. This is also a source of real variety in the game. This is one of the ways in which the game tries to mix up how the game can play. So there's different modular elements where the road is basically broken up into 4 different segments. And then there's a bridge at the end, because we're building the King Charles Bridge, of course, where you actually get your end game scoring. And you can replace those first, or is it 3 stops actually, Jake? I think it might be 3 stops along the road. And those can give different immediate bonuses or ongoing effects that you'll get for upgrading different things or things like that. And I like the eggs feel more impactful as a resource than the other two. There's a good, it doesn't feel like everything's worth exactly the same in terms of resources. The game obviously signposts this too, as they make you trade gold for eggs. But I liked this enough. I wasn't particularly judged by it. It didn't excite me, but moving down the road always feels good. And the excitement of getting to build the road and getting the bonuses for putting one of the road slats down as it is, and then seeing what your end game bonuses were good. I was frustrated at some points with this game that the planning of my end game scoring, that there wasn't more room for it. It made it so much more tactical than strategic almost.
Yeah, I think my thoughts on the road, like, it's fun to go down it. It feels good getting these powerful bonuses, but it's like, can you do it without resistance? Then you should
do it. Yeah.
If it's like really difficult because it's going to cost you a lot to get a egg, and then maybe don't wait until you'll have the opportunity later to get an egg through a more organic way. which is definitely going to come up sooner or later in the game.
It's so interesting because this is actually a great example of like another version of what you were saying with the wheel mechanism. Because if the go down the bridge action ever aligns with the you get an egg bonus, it's just like, yeah, no, there's not much of a decision. I'm doing that. It's great. I more so than Jake will just pay a gold to do that too sometimes. So I'll pay 2 gold for my egg and then move down the road. Just because I feel like those pairings really incentivize it, but it doesn't feel like a deep decision always between those trade-offs. Maybe part of that too is just like you can always do other stuff later and everything feels kind of equivalent. I don't know.
Yeah. I have some thoughts on like kind of the modular nature of that, but let's save that and transition into upgrades, which happens in various ways throughout the game, and I guess also inserts some amount of variability to your play. So one of the actions is you can grab a tile to upgrade any of those 6 actions throughout the game, and they can range from just giving you like an extra point, victory point every time you take that action, to giving you some resource output. The ones you get early in the game in age 1 are like very small bonuses in general, and the ones you get in age 2 can be very powerful effects, giving you more difficult to achieve resources or help advance you up different tracks. So that's kind of a way in which the game puts forward this idea that like you can have a different play experience, right? Because theoretically, if I take the first turn of the game to upgrade the road action, then that's gonna play out in the decisions I'm making throughout the game, right? Okay, well this time I'm going big on the road, or same with any of the actions. But because the bonuses are like so small, I never felt like in any of my plays like, wow, this is like a unique build.
Yeah. It all just felt like incremental effects. Some of the age 2 stuff, it does give you a little bit more. Like in a game we're playing right now, I just got a bonus on my upgrade actions tile where I can get an egg. No, I can get a gold window by paying a gold, I believe it is. That feels a little special, but I'll only use it once or twice probably over the course of the game.
Yeah. And similarly, there's a technology track where you can collect these books in various ways throughout the game, and that's going to upgrade different techs. The first 2 give you small incremental bonuses again by doing something in the game, which are like always nice to have, but never seem to like at best they could be like tiebreakers. And when you're thinking about the actual decisions you're making, the bonuses aren't big enough for you to like go out of your way to like use that action a lot.
Oftentimes too, they're just different sides of the same coin. Like, okay, this game I got the one that gives me stone for this action, or this time I got the one that gives me gold for this action, or this time I got the one that incentivizes me to go up the hunger wall, or this time I got the one that incentivizes me to go up the cathedral. I never have a true sense of a shifted identity.
Right. Yeah, and it's the exact same with the scoring tiles, right? By the time you get to the point in the game where you can unlock a scoring tile by like one of the end game scoring, which can be the windows we've talked about, the seals that you get from getting your production all the way up, or getting to the end of the road, or getting all the way up the hunger track. Like by the time you're doing that in the game, you get to randomly look at 3, and you just always pick the one that's best for you at that time, right? It doesn't really give you any ability to strategize, and because you're only looking at 3 of the possible 6 or 8, you can't really prioritize like going for one ahead of time either, because it just might not come up. And I found in most of my plays, by the time I'm looking at that, it's like, okay, this one's going to give me 9 points, or this one's going to give me 7 points, and this one's going to give me 8 points, with the possibility that I could get 10 off of it. So, it's just such a small little choice that doesn't really feel like, whoa, like I'm being rewarded for like a diversity in my build. So I think all these things together just creates this game that is just like, for how big it is and how much like variable aspects there are in the game, none of them change your play in a significant way, So it just feels
Mm.
like there's a little bit of turbulence. It's just like not very replayable after you've really got your head around it. In after really 3 or 4 plays, you're just doing the same thing.
Because your heuristic tree just makes it feel rote is
Right.
essentially, yeah. And I think a lot of the stuff that you just said, Jake, like the seals or the bridge tiles at the end, those modular or like unique scoring outlets. Partially, what I heard you saying also is like the benefits of these isn't great enough, which that's a concession of wanting all of the actions to feel roughly the same, so that it can be this really broad decision space. But then it makes it not feel like it matters. So that's where some of the frustration is too, if they're all roughly equal. What do you think of the hunger wall and the cathedral? These sort of grid track mechanisms, because there weren't enough tracks in the technology and the King Charles Bridge and the production, and we just throw these grids up here too.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. From the decision space lens, right?
Yep.
It doesn't really impact the decision space that much, right? It does add an extra thing to like, layer into your heuristic decision making process that you're using to frame all the decisions in the game. Where a lot of times you can kind of, I don't know the term for it, you can collect these bonuses that will score you points based on however far to the right or left you get on one of these tracks. So when you're placing a tile in the game, if you have the opportunity to get two of those instead of one, it's like that's the kind of decision that it adds into the game. And for most people, right, two is always going to be better than one. So it's not really increasing the decision space in any way, but it is increasing the complexity. So I think like that might be one element of the game I'm just like not sure is needed.
They're juxtaposed, which I think is important too, because it's very difficult to get all the way to the right and all the way on the left in the way that those bonus tokens, those, like Jake said, the further you go on the right on either of these give you more points, or maybe it's the left, I can't remember, whatever, to the end of the track in the X axis of the grid axes, you're going to get more points. You kind of have to choose between them to some extent, but you can still then go up both of them. To me, one of the interesting mechanisms is the bonuses that you get for landing on certain squares that push you one to the left or push you one higher, that can give you a little bit of extra value. And the timing aspects that it puts in the game of, is this the right time to spend 2 silver windows to move up, spend some of those extra resources as sort of that bonus action in my turn. But then I found the more I played, it was just sort of like, I'm going to sit on 2 windows until I go over the window limit. And then I'm going to, if I got a gold window, I'll take another action because that's very powerful. Or if I end up with 3 silver windows, I'll just do it then. And then I'll have more information anyway and just try to decide which way is better to go. And those horizontal bonus spots try to fight this somewhat and say like, oh, look, you've moved sideways. So maybe you do want to spend them now and go up. But oftentimes, to get another little added incremental effect. But a lot of times, like Jake is saying, the decisions didn't feel quite as interesting in terms of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess we should say one of the interesting, is again, it's like something that seems really interesting on the surface is that to go. So I guess walls, I should say, the wall tiles you can get and add to your personal player board allow you to move to on the cathedral track, but they give you the tokens that benefit moving on the hunger track.
Mm-hmm.
And then the buildings in the game give you the type of tokens that you are rewarded for by moving right from the wall bonuses.
Yep.
So it's sort of it cancels out, right? You're getting the tokens, but moving on the other track from one versus the other. So it seems like an interesting trade-off, but in practice, it's just like another thing in this game that rewards you for just like taking whatever action happens to be the most efficient at that time over specializing in any way. And so I wonder if, maybe the game would be different and feel a little more unique if instead of doing that decision, the walls synergized with each other. Right. And then
Yeah.
maybe you'd get more of like a unique build, like, wow, like that game, I really focused on doing walls and I surrounded my whole area with walls or something like that, as opposed to what in reality, at least to me, seems to be most often the best play, which is like I built a couple walls and I built a couple buildings to
Yeah.
maximize the value.
Yeah, totally. I think that's really well put. And I guess to that point, maybe we talk about cities.
Let's do it.
So cities were an element of this game, or buildings, excuse me, because there's only one city. It's Praga. It's Prague. They're buildings. This was an element of the game I was most excited about. It is positioned in the game as like you're going to do this fun area control sort of interaction for these bonus spots with other players, while getting some other bonus tiles that apply to the hunger wall and cathedral along the way. In practice, I found that because the space is so large, even at higher player counts, it didn't really ever feel like the area control and being the one who has the most cubes on a given location matters as much, especially because there's like points for first and points for second, a bonus for first and a bonus for second, and they're not hugely different. And then on top of that, not even all this building tiles play into this. So sure, you can like block spots, but you're also pushing players closer to just finishing them and getting the bonuses before game end in a way that this also started to feel a lot like I'm going to take this action and then I'll just select what's the best available right at this moment, in a way that didn't shift my decision space really in terms of future decisions and impact what I wanted to do on future turns, in a way that pushed me in the direction of something else on the action wheel meaningfully. I could get to it if I got to it, and if it mattered, it would be great. And if not, I'll do something else that matters. And I don't know. It didn't. I expected there to be a lot of life and vibrancy in this aspect of the game, this system, and instead it felt kind of flat.
Right. It feels like the map needs to be different at 2 players. I just think it doesn't really make a lot of sense that the same map you're using at 2 players is the one you use at 4 players, because at 4 players, like, the mechanic is literally you get bonuses paid off when a tile on the map is completely surrounded. So that just happens so much less often in 2 player, because you can just, it's so easy to avoid accidentally helping an opponent. This is Jake, jumping in from the editor's booth to clear up something I got wrong. It is true that you play on the same map in a 2-player, 3-player, 4-player game, but in the 2-player game, there are several plazas removed from the board, so there will be less to complete, theoretically increasing competition for the ones that are there, though I will say in my experience playing the game, it is still more rare that plazas are completed in the 2-player game versus when you have the full complement of players. Okay, back to my rant. But I found even in 4-player game, like, this action seemed to be often the worst. Like, the buildings are just like really expensive a lot of times. Anytime you're doing a building, unless you're completing it and getting the bonus for yourself, it's adding value to somebody else in some way, which is like not the case with any of the other actions in the game. Because even if you're not fully surrounding it for somebody or allowing them to surround it, it still makes the next person who places on that plaza is going to get 1 more bonus point than you got. So that just seems like a weird misbalance, just kind of like a miscalibration. I think that, I'm getting away from the decision space and putting on my reviewer hat a little more, but like, I wonder if like these could cost less to incentivize this action being a little bit stronger in the game.
Yeah, well put. I think we both kind of, gave our own mini turbulence on that one.
While we're doing turbulence, okay, run the bit real quick.
This is your captain speaking. We are now approaching a little bit of turbulence. Please return to your seats and buckle your safety belts.
Okay, the last thing I want to say on turbulence is I think that I found that there's just like not a lot of balance in the tiles that come up, and they can be super swingy. You mentioned that you got the upgrade tile that gives golden windows, and that tile is like so absurdly powerful in the game compared to other upgrade tiles that it's like I think I would be tempted at this point to like not have it in my game if I own this game and like house rule it out because it's just so strong. There's another, I think it's a upgrade tile that gives books when you build walls to help you get up the book track, and that one also seems just like significantly stronger than others. And the same is true in buildings, like where it just seems like some of them are just so much stronger than others that could be cost the exact same. And there is a mechanism that allows you to kind of dig a little bit to remove some from the display to add to others. But I don't know. It's just something that like stuck out to me because in Suchi's Underwater Cities design, it's like another game with like all kinds of like crazy player powers, but everything feels like so tightly balanced that like it makes me want to like assume that I'm just like off and not calculating this right. But you know, my experience with the game is my experience with the game, and it just seems like a little bit wonky in some cases.
I think, yeah, to go back to Underwater City, since you invoked it, and I've already invoked it twice in this episode, I think one of my frustrations too is in playing Underwater Cities, I do feel like at the end of every game, my identity, how unique my experience was, really did shift. And I feel like my Underwater City and network of cities is quite different than yours. And my experience of that decision engine was a unique experience in a way that here, every game feels like I feel a little bit like I'm stuck in like a Kafka-esque like pushing action selection buttons like over and over like Nightmare Land of Euro. And I don't know. I know there's people out there who this game is going to work for them and they won't feel that way about the decision engine. And that's awesome. It is not the game for me. Once we finish our games, I will say bon voyage to this one forever, I think, hopefully.
That's pretty harsh. I would continue to play it, I think, now that I know how to play it. I do think it plays smoothly. And maybe that's like the difference between our overall impressions. You gave it a 5. I gave it a 6.5, which is like, I still think it's like fine and pleasant and fun and it flows nice. Like I enjoy taking my actions. I'm just not finding like a lot there.
You also want to grind it for elo points for Yukata.
That's true.
Another aspect. Mr. 9 out of 11 wins and trying to upgrade yourself. Of course you will, a little bit.
But yeah, that is true. I mean, yeah. I think you point out a good bias. Like maybe if I wasn't like winning, I'd be having less fun.
I think also that's just a difference between us as gamers too, right? Like that's me enjoying Keyflower more than you because of the zaniness of it and how different it is, and you disliking it and liking this a little bit more because it's streamlined. I think just that is our preference for even these sort of like resource management games.
Absolutely. I would be interested. I hope people who love this game tell me why I'm wrong. Because even as we come to the end of this discussion, and I think we have been more critical than we've been extolling this game, to be sure, I still feel like part of me is like, okay, this is where I'm at after 11 plays. But after 15 plays, you know, like I just feel like I need somebody to come and just like whip me at this game.
Sure,
and that could like completely change my perspective on like, okay, wait a second. Like it's not as easy as like I want to get golden windows, you know, greater sign books, greater sign eggs, greater sign white windows, greater sign, you know, increasing production, like greater sign basic resource, because that's literally how I'm playing this game right now in almost all cases.
Totally. You could just write a little application and then you could take your turns and you got it that way. I think that if I'm allowed closing thoughts very quickly, Jake, I will say I think that for me, one thing that makes Praga a harder sell of like this question of like, should someone try Praga? I would say if you're a big Euro fan, try it. It might be exactly your jam. It might be what you were looking for. I will say I came into this episode. I talked about this a few weeks ago, being really excited to come back to a Euro game. I'd been missing playing Euro games as we jumped into some other things and it didn't quite do it. And I think partially that's because I think the The rules complexity, it's like a mid to heavyweight Euro. It's not any crazy type of heavy, but the rules baggage is quite high. So the amount of investment in reading the rules book was pretty high to the depth of the game. And I found that maybe for how much it asked of me, I wish it gave back a little bit more.
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's a hard recommend because of the rules grit, and also seeing the reactions of people who've been pre-planning this game with us in our Discord, bouncing off of it pretty hard in general. That said, if a 30-minute rules video does not strike you as like crazy, like, oh yeah, that's what I like doing on my lunch break anyway.
Yeah.
I really believe most people are going to have a pretty fun first play of this. So I think that's kind of the two sides of the coin. If a 30-minute rules tutorial scares you away, you can feel very safe staying away from this one. But if not, and if you've enjoyed other designs, I'm really glad to have played this game. And I really did enjoy my first 3 or 4 plays, especially.
And if you are like, but I haven't played Underwater Cities, maybe listen to the Underwater Cities episode of Decision Space and then try that one on Yukata first, or try the one that sounds more interesting to you.
Yeah. Underwater Cities, easy recommend, and all this aside, like, I'm still incredibly impressed with Vladimir Suchy as a designer and want to seek out his other games that I haven't played. The Pulsar is one I really want to try and have it, and I'll be really interested in future output from the designer as well. I don't feel like scared off at all.
No, I think that's a cool design that I'm sure he'll take little pieces from. And I'm always going to be excited to see what Vladimir Suchy's next game is as well. And maybe for us too, Jake, we should keep in the back of our mind that idea of decision engines for a What We Talk About episode. Because I feel like if that's the product of this episode, that would be even greater if we can build upon that idea maybe. So something for maybe the listeners to tuck in the back of their minds as well. So like, what are decision engines and when do they work well and why?
Well, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Decision Space. As always, if you like what you heard, didn't like what you heard, hop in our Discord. We always include a link in the description, and there's great conversation about games, episodes, video games, books, whatever you want, like lively discussion going on there all the time. It's a great community of people and I hope that you want to become a part of it. You can always follow us on Twitter. We have a Twitter for the show. It's Decision Spa. That's Decision SPA. You can follow Brendan at Burnside BH and myself at Jake Freed. That's JAKEFRYD. Any other plugs I'm missing, Brendan?
I think that's pretty much it, except for I think you mentioned, but I'm not sure, the link to the Discord is in our show notes. And then beyond that, we always have to thank Hembry for their hit single Reach Out for our intro and outro song.
And they got another song out, a new single called, oh gosh, it's like Suppliers or something.
This is such a smooth close.
Operators. Check out their new single, Operators, as well, if you like what you've heard from them from this podcast. All right, until next time, see ya.
Bye, all.